Yes, I'm ready.
Oh, fantastic. Great. Thank you so much for joining us today in Dakar, Senegal. First time visiting the country, right?
I'm sorry?
Is it the first time visiting Dakar?
Yes, it is my first time. Hopefully one day I'll do it in the real verse, not in the metaverse.
Fantastic. Okay. Of course, this talk is going to center around the Bitcoin standard, and actually we're going to focus on Senegal and Bitcoin. But before we get into that, I just wanted to ask a gentle first personal question. What got you personally interested in Bitcoin? Was there a talk, was there a time, was there a moment when you thought I must write one of the most well-known Bitcoin books?
You know, honestly, sadly, I just don't have a good answer to that question because I don't even remember when was the first time I heard about Bitcoin. I heard about it very early, and I spent the first couple of years of hearing about it being one of those many skeptical people who just you don't put in the time to study Bitcoin. You just go by what the newspaper says, and you don't care enough to look into it, and you just are sure that it's not going to work. Obviously it's not going to work, and so because you're sure it's not going to work, it's not worth your time studying it. So I spent a couple of years not thinking about it, not taking it seriously. It was really only in 2013, 14, around that time when I thought it was going to go away, and it kept not going away. And then what I found was really fascinating when I first learned about mining Bitcoin, and I realized that there are people out there that are buying machines and spending a lot of electricity in order to make Bitcoin. That's when a light bulb went off in my head and made me realize, okay, this thing is serious, because it's not just that there are a bunch of people who are writing code and then they can make as many of the coins as they want. The fact that they need to spend money and resources in order to make new coins means that this is something real. It's like gold. It's not something fake like government money where you just press a button and then as much money as you want comes along. So that's when I really started to look into it, 2013, 14, 15. And then 2016 is when I became really really interested. It was consuming. Before then I was like, I wasn't that convinced, but I liked it. I thought it was a good idea. I thought it had a good chance of working. But only in 2016 did I really start paying attention. And then in 2017 is when it became like an obsession, and I was talking about it all the time. So in early 2017, I decided I'm going to write this book. And because I was spending all my time on Facebook talking to people about Bitcoin all the time. And my wife just said, why are you on Facebook all the time talking about Bitcoin? Why don't you just go and write something about Bitcoin? And I thought to myself, wow, that's such a brilliant idea. Instead of writing all these long essays in my comments on fighting with people on Facebook, I could just write things and sell them to people and organize my thoughts and send them and write them in a place where they can be read by many people rather than just a few people. So that was really the turning point. And then I decided, all right, no more Facebook, no more arguing on the internet. And I'm just going to put my ideas into one book. And then if anybody wants to know what I think, they can just look at this book and see for themselves.
Fantastic. I think we can all relate to lots of things you said there, from the conversations with our partners about being obsessed with this thing and wanting to do something about it, to that aha moment with Bitcoin. Before we get onto the book, I got a tweet the other day saying, I've read the Bitcoin Standard. Can someone condense it for me? Is there a simple takeaway message you can get from this? And I got everything from it's literally just buy Bitcoin. Forget about the noise. That was one of the better comments. Some gave me selections of quotes, video summaries. But I thought I'd ask the man himself, how would you, if you could, summarize the Bitcoin Standard into a couple of minutes to those that are sitting here today? Would it be stay humble and stack sats, or would it be something a bit more profound?
Yeah, I think stay humble and stack sats is a very good executive summary. If I were to summarize the content of the book a little bit more elaborately, I'd say historically, all throughout history, people have always ended up using as money whatever is the hardest to make. And so the first 4 chapters of the book focus on explaining this. You see so many examples, from seashells being replaced by gold. You see silver getting replaced by gold. You see in West Africa, glass beads were used as money in the past, and then they stopped being used as money when they were replaced by gold. And the trend is always the same. Whatever is easy to make is replaced by whatever is hard to make as money, always. And so this is why gold ended up being money all over the world. And this is even true today across government currencies. If you look around the world, you see that the world is predominantly holding on to dollars, and everybody wants to hold dollars. And all the currencies that have higher inflation rates, they make more of the currency, but they lose value faster and faster over time. So because of this, we see that all over the world, we get the same relationship where the hardest money continues to get chosen, and the people who choose the easier money suffered greatly from the fact that they choose the easier money. And so the example of glass beads in West Africa is very important because they're known as the slave beads because they allowed Europeans to buy a lot of African slaves, because these beads were very easy to make for Europeans because Europeans had glass making technology, whereas West Africans did not. And so Europeans would come to West Africa with enormous quantities of these glass beads that were used as money. And because of that, they're able to buy all of the resources that were in West Africa very cheaply, because they could make those glass beads very cheaply, whereas West Africans could not make the gold that Europeans used as money very cheaply. So if you have the easy thing as money, you will suffer greatly, and you will witness your resources basically taken away by people who have the hardest thing as money. And what we see today is that we see this in government money, and today we see this happening with Bitcoin. And that's the conclusion of the book, that Bitcoin is the hardest money, and that's why its price continues to go up, because it's the hardest money. Nobody can make more of it. Nobody can increase the supply. And so people who hold on to Bitcoin are protected from inflation because nobody can make more of it. And people who hold on to other forms of money witness the value of these monies decline over time.
I think that's super important, particularly the notes, the easiest thing as money. If you have the easiest thing as money, you'll have your resources taken away. Now, we're in Senegal, which is part of West Africa, which is the CFA, which is the French hangover colonial currency. And it's the easiest money. Perhaps in Africa, one of the worst currencies anyway in Africa. And lots of Bitcoins who are inspired by how bad the CFA is to make change here. I just wanted to draw a parallel between perhaps Lebanon and Senegal, Lebanon, and West Africa, because obviously you are Lebanese, spend a lot of time there. To what extent are these issues we see in emerging markets, do you think they could, to some extent, catalyze a path towards the Bitcoin standard? We've seen El Salvador adopt Bitcoin. That was a dollarized economy. What do you think about places like Lebanon and to some extent Senegal?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. Small correction, I'm not exactly Lebanese. I'm Palestinian, Jordanian, but I've lived in Lebanon for a lot of my life. But I think it's a very similar dynamic all over the world, because what we have is this monetary system around the world that's based on the dollar allows all of the world's central banks to base their money on the dollar, and then the dollar is easy money. And so their money is itself constantly being devalued to finance the US government effectively. And then the local governments are also financing themselves. So if you live in Senegal or in Lebanon or anywhere in the world outside of the US, you are suffering from inflation twice. Your central bank is increasing the currency supply that you have in order to finance the government, or in the case of Senegal, in order to finance the French government. And also you are increasing the money supply. The money supply that your central bank is holding, which is dollar-based, is also increasing, and it is increased by the U.S. government to finance the U.S. government and the U.S. military. And so you're paying two governments when you're outside the U.S. At least in the U.S., you only suffer from inflation once from the U.S. government. But outside the U.S., you're suffering from inflation twice. So all over the world, it's the same problem. And many people are inclined to think like it's something unique to Senegal, or it's something unique to Lebanon, or it's unique to Argentina. But the more you travel, the more you see it's the same thing. Over the last 100 years, it's become impossible for people all over the world to save money, because they are unable to use anything that is hard to make as money. They have to use something that is easy to make as money. And so the thing that they're using is constantly losing value, and it becomes impossible for people to save. And so your wealth is constantly being devalued, and it's constantly declining, and people are having to and people are having to find ways to make ends meet. So, you see this all over the world where people spend most of their income. Nobody saves anymore, because if you wanted to save, the money that you have will not hold on to its value. So there's very little incentive to save. So people don't save, people don't think of the future, and I think it's a big catastrophe. The whole world is on hyperinflation in slow motion, but in occasionally it turns into hyperinflation in full speed, as we saw in Senegal, I think in 1998, and in or 94, I think it was in Senegal. I had a discussion on the SIFA in my podcast with um, I'm sorry, my name escapes me. Do you? Yes, yes, yes. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names.
No, he's now shitcoining.
I'm sorry?
He's now shitcoining.
Oh, well, everybody's got to go through their phase, but he'll come back eventually, I'm sure. But yeah, and then in Lebanon, you see it. But it's the same thing. Like when you see what happens with the hyperinflation, you see like society falls apart. It's not just that people lose their value that they put in the bank. This is the real catastrophe. It's not just that, all right, people had savings in their bank account and then the savings were gone. This is obviously catastrophic, but it's even worse than that, because not just do the savings disappear, but also your ability to spend money and your ability to trade with money is destroyed. So the value of money declines all over the world, and your ability in your country, and then all the supply chains and all the trading that takes place in the economy begins to fall apart. So it becomes really hard to have economic production. Businesses go out of business, and things that are profitable, even a profitable business, even a good business goes out of business. Even somebody who's got a real job, it's destroyed because the company can't function when there is no money. The only way that we can have capitalism, the only way that we can have division of labor, is if we have a functioning monetary system. And as it stands, as the money is continuously devalued, we're unable to have a functioning monetary system.
Really interesting point. And I feel like personally, I left London after 3 years, and I realised that I just literally couldn't save money there, despite trying my hardest and getting all the necessary achievements and all those things we require in a Fiat world or a Fiat Standard. There's a few fans in the audience, myself included, and some people even bought books to be signed here. So I'm going to ask the audience to ask you some questions too. I just wanted to round off myself. Why do you look forward to a world that would be on a Bitcoin standard, assuming that we're going to get there?
I think it's just going to be extremely different. In my book, in the Bitcoin standard, I look at the gold standard era between 1870 and 1914, when the whole world was on a gold standard. And I think it was an excellent period of time. In many ways, that you look around the world today and you see that these are things that are a problem for us. So just simply a world in which everybody is able to save. For me, that is the most important thing. A world in which everybody is able to hold on to money and save in a money that they can trust to hold to its value into the future. That's enormously important. I think just everybody being able to save money and hand it over to their children, and everybody being born into a family that has savings, is absolutely amazing as a concept. And I think it's going to make people much more productive and much more creative, rather than the world where we live in right now, where everybody effectively is very insecure and therefore very unproductive, because they are constantly just trying to run just to stay where they are. You're placed on a treadmill where you need to be running all the time just to stay where you are. So I think moving away from that world is going to be enormously beneficial. And I think the other aspect of it is taking financing away from governments. This is the other really powerful thing. As the world stands, because governments can print money, they are able to continuously centrally plan their economies. They're able to spend money on all kinds of unproductive things. They're able to finance war and finance all kinds of horrible ideas. And all of that is possible because of inflation. And if we take that away from governments, if we prevent governments from doing that, I think the world will just be enormously better. The world will be more peaceful. Wars will be much more expensive. And instead of wasting resources on economic central planning and war and all kinds of horrible things that governments do, we'd have resources in the hands of people to be able to spend them as they see fit and to make their life better like they want to.
Can I be a bit cheeky? Can I ask you for a timeline? How far away is this Bitcoin standard to become?
It's difficult. I don't make this as a prediction, but I don't know. I'm gonna guess maybe 15 to 20 years, something like that. Let's say. I mean, it's in a sense, it's already here if you want it to be. Like if you're on a Bitcoin standard, if you moved on to Bitcoin, then it's already there. But over time, I think it's just going to become more and more people are going to get into it, and more people are going to see the value, and more people are going to benefit into it. When it becomes the dominant money is difficult to predict, but I'm going to say maybe 15 to 20 years.
That's okay. Well, very good. Thank you so much, Saifedean. And I'm going to ask Stefan. You had a question, yeah? Stefan's Mexican Belgian who works at the UN World Food Program, living here in Dakar.
Thanks. Thank you so much for the work so far. I have 2 questions. First, I know you were a big fan of the stock flow model, which was further elaborated upon by Andy. So the first question is, how do you see this stock flow model now? Second question would be, I'm a believer of digital scarcity being able
I'm sorry. I didn't hear the second question. What did you say?
The digital scarcity can exist one time. What are the odds, or what are the possibilities that something will be created that would replace Bitcoin? Something that is even harder money than Bitcoin.
Oh, okay. So with regards to the stock to flow model, I'd say I think the mathematical prediction, the precise mathematical prediction of the model has basically failed at this point, because if you looked at the projection as it was going, basically since about a year ago, the price has diverged significantly. Well, not a year, I think a little less than a year, like 9 months, 10 months. It spent the last 10 months or so outside of the range of where you would have expected it to be. So on a very simple basis, like the model has just been that pure mathematical model. It's been rejected. It was making a prediction, and it was for me, it was extremely startling, the fact that it was so precise and you could just see the thing tracking the prediction for so long. And that was really fascinating for me, because if you heard, I've done a couple of podcasts about it, and I also discussed it in my Austrian economics course on my website. For me, it shouldn't have been this accurate, and it was freakish how accurate it was. So in a sense, I'm almost kind of relieved that it is broken, because as an Austrian economist, from an Austrian economics perspective, we're not supposed to be able to predict economic phenomena with this kind of numerical precision. And that's a very powerful critique that Austrian economists have of mathematical economics, which is that you can't predict with quantities. And so, when Joe asked me about thinking of a time, this was just a random guess that I make as an observer. It's not an economic thing that I come across. It's not a conclusion that I arrive at from studying economics. And I'm very skeptical of these kinds of numerical predictions. So I initially, when I first heard about the model, I was extremely skeptical that it would work, and I immediately dismissed it. But then I couldn't dismiss the fact that it was extremely accurate for a very long time. So now it's not accurate anymore, that model. However, I still think the stock to flow as a concept is enormously important. And I think this is, a lot of people mix this up. Like the fact that stock to flow is important toward determining the monetary status does not depend on that quantitative model. It's a qualitative argument, and it's a first principles argument that explains that, clearly, if there is something that is easy to make, something whose supply is increasing every year at 50%, it's not going to be as good a monetary asset as something that is hard to make, whose supply is increasing at 1% per year. And I think that still holds. Now, what the model said is that we can quantify that, and we can predict it precisely against the US dollar across time, which is just, it sounds absurd, and it was absolutely insane that it worked for a while, but now it doesn't work anymore. So I think that is kind of settled in my mind. But I still think it's still the concept of scarcity as measured through stock to flow. I still think is very valid, and I also think it's and I also still think like we're the model itself, what it's saying qualitatively, which is that after you have the halving, the stock to flow rises. The stock to flow basically doubles after the halving because the new production drops by half. That still holds. We still saw a big spike in Bitcoin every time after the halving. We've had 3 halvings so far, and every time there was a spike. So I would still say that over the next halving, after the next halving, I would expect that there would be a spike in Bitcoin's price. But I don't know how much it will spike, and I have a lot less confidence in any kind of mathematical prediction about where we're going to go to. So this is how I would think of it. In terms of your second question, whether something else will be invented, look, you can never say never, and it's difficult to make it's impossible to prove something like this, that nothing will ever be invented. But here's why I think it's practically impossible, and why I think it's extremely difficult that something like this would happen. Because first of all, if you're going to invent something, so I could invent a digital currency that has a supply growth rate of 0.01% per year forever. And that's much harder than Bitcoin. But then how am I going to increase the supply and get people into it? What mechanism do I have for distributing it? So if you start off by just, let's say we make this new currency, we're going to make 100 million and we're going to distribute it across the world. So we're going to make 100 million of this. How are we going to give it to people if it has no value? And why would people trust in this thing to maintain value? And why would they want to hold on to it? So we've seen a lot of airdrops of digital currencies. What happens with airdrops? You give people a digital currency that they don't value and they don't care about, and you tell them, hey, take it so that we can create a market in this thing. And what do? If they have the ability to sell it, immediately they sell it. The day that they get the ability to sell it, they sell it. So this economic value is not something that you can just posit onto things. So you need an already existing network of money that already exists, and then you would need to make it hard. You can't just make a new money out of scratch, because if it's a new money, how are you going to distribute it? How are people going to hold on to it? Where are people going to get it from? So because of that, I think it's difficult to see any other digital currency achieving wide adoption and getting to a harder monetary policy. But of course, the second problem, and this is perhaps the bigger problem, is the issue of centralization. So it could happen, for instance, with a national currency. What if the US government says, all right, we've read the Bitcoin standard and we agree this is about the hardness of money. And so we're going to beat Bitcoin by making the dollar harder than Bitcoin. We're going to give the dollar a supply growth rate of 0.1% or 0%. We're just going to not make any more dollars. We're going to stop all financial institutions from being able to create dollars, and the only way that you can get a dollar is to get it from somebody who already has it. If we do something like this, what's going to happen? Okay, maybe they can pull it off, but do you trust them to hold on to this promise forever? No, the politics are just too overwhelmingly strong in favor of taking that money and spending it, taking that money supply and increasing it. There's going to be calls for, hey, we can build hospitals if we just put a tiny little bit of money. Do you want children to die? No. If you don't want children to die, then you want us to build hospitals. So, and then there's going to be, well, let's fight a war and let's do this and let's do that. So whether it's with national currency or with digital currency, we don't have the ability of creating a new currency that's going to be decentralized so that we can trust in somebody saying we're not going to increase the money supply. So for instance, Ethereum and many other shitcoins have a low supply growth rate. The Ethereum seemed to be really affected by the whole stock to flow idea, that they decided that the best way for them to compete with Bitcoin and to flip in Bitcoin was to increase their stock to flow. And even they're aiming to make it negative. But if they can change the stock to flow, if they can change the supply growth rate, they can change it again. And so maybe they'll do it now, but clearly I don't think anybody trusts them to hold on to it. Well, with Bitcoin, you don't have to trust anybody. You know that it's 21 million because you verify it on your own node. So with Bitcoin, you know it's 21 million. You have your own node, and you don't need anybody else to behave in order for it to do it. And that's really the insurmountable obstacle, in my opinion. Those two things, in my mind, are what make it very difficult for anything else to recreate the miracle of Bitcoin.
Come full circle, we'll come around to stay humble, stack sats, right? It's the important thing. Okay. Saifedean, thank you so much for your time. I think we're going to have to call it there. No more questions? Okay, there's another session coming out. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak to me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And yeah,
Yes.
follow his podcast, and of course on Twitter, and read his book and and the next book is coming. When's it coming out?
Next year, 2023, soon.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much. Take care.
Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.